TNIF, think now it's Friday. I'm like, the G is questionable. No, I'm just kidding. The N is also questionable. But thank everybody. Welcome to another. Oh, actually, this isn't DU Real. This is the first episode of our research series. We just decided to do it live because why not? So, Jackie and I did a little research over the past week, and we've been exploring the mind body connection. And my goodness, a week did not even feel like enough time to scratch the surface, let alone like really get a good understanding. But thankfully, we're not the only ones who are not fully grasping the concept of the mind body connection, and more than the concept, understanding the experience, because they are so interconnected and they influence each other. And it is astounding in the ways that the way that you feel physically influences your mental processes and your mental state, your emotional states, and vice versa. And it's a lot. Jackie, how are you doing processing? How did the research go?
It went very well. I think that's probably one of the biggest things, though, that we want to emphasize through this series with research is that it's never about getting the answer, because really there aren't very many hard and fast answers that we know for sure to be true. Even if there are theories with a lot of evidence supporting that, a theory is not fact. A theory is just our best guess based on all of this context, but it's never, this is set in stone, because as we've seen time and time again, as we continue to develop our scientific methods, our ways of thinking and questioning and digging into a problem, eventually the findings change as well. And things continue to get deeper and deeper, almost to the point where you can keep looking at it forever. And at the bottom of it is this fundamental mystery, specifically in regards to the mind body connection. This is something that I really wanted to start off with in terms of our research series, because I think it's very related to our conversation here at DU, right? Like, we are aware that our mind and our body, although they are inherently interconnected, we experience them somewhat differently, right? Like, our mind and our brain aren't the same thing. The experience of the mind is something that is extremely difficult to explain, because it's like a fish trying to describe water, right? It's like you can't look at something and study it objectively when you can't escape it. And that's sort of what we're dealing with in terms of consciousness and subjectivity. Because we know, when we feel like there are studies specifically with the neural correlates of consciousness, where they're looking at what's going on in the brain when certain conscious activities are happening. And we can find patterns and be like, yeah, this area lights up when they're experiencing this. But the issue is, and this is kind of where we can start getting into the theories, is that there's this hard problem of consciousness, or I've in the studies I was reading, that it was also called the mind-body problem, which is just, they don't understand why or necessarily how neurons firing and all these physical processes happening, right, produces the subjective experience. Like, why is there the experience of redness, right? Like, if you see a color, why do you have the phenomenal experience of seeing that color? Like, why is there something it's like to be a human, rather than if we were just functioning on purely like biological mechanisms, we could just be, we would look and do the same things, but we would be almost like robotic, or like zombie like if we didn't have an internal consciousness. And yet we do. And it doesn't necessarily make sense why, but it's just something that is undeniable because it is the very root of our experience, right? Like it's the one thing that we know for sure exists, right? I experience me, but it's also the biggest mystery. So, um, yeah, this is something I learned about when I was in um, college. In my undergraduate class, I took a course called The Science of Consciousness, and like learning about this, just this gap specifically baffled me, and it really did change my perspective from believing wholly in like scientific abilities and like um I used to believe that, you know, there was a bedrock of objective reality that we could look at and study in a way that was meaningful and would apply to like every scenario. But this sort of made me question that, and that's exciting because it opens your mind up to a lot more different possibilities. So, yeah, that's what we're digging into today, the mind body connection, um, how that relates to our overall health and well being, as well as just what's going on there in general. So, that's kind of what we've been reading into the past week. But yeah, Amanda, I'll let you like kick us off. Did you find anything specific, or did you have somewhere in particular you wanted to start with?
I definitely, oh man. So one of the studies that I had looked into was from the University of Washington, or Washington University School of Medicine, and they discovered a new network within the brain called the Somatocognitive Action Network. The acronym SCAN, which links areas controlling movement with those involved in cognitive functions like thinking, planning, and control of internal organs. And I thought that that was cool because they were testing the work of, who was it? Because what I love about science is that everyone's always like trying to fact check and always trying to test the theories of other scientists, which is amazing. Let me see, because it was boom, boom, boom. Let me pull up my link. This is a link for sciencedaily.com, was my resource, and we going over and goodness, it was I forget his name, but it was, oh, Penfield. Is that his Penfield? I feel like I'm scanning. I could have taken better notes. But Dr. Penfield was, I believe, either a neurologist or a brain surgeon who, I think I pulled up his work. Let me see. No, there it is. In the 1930s, neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield mapped such motor areas of the brain by applying small jolts of electricity to expose brains of people undergoing brain surgery and noting their responses. And so he created a map that was supposed to say, like, when you trigger this part of the brain, it triggers this part of the body, to kind of like prove that there was a mind body connection, which I guess still is a brain body connection, but they're saying that the mind is what controls the brain, and so that, and the brain is like it's the levers that it's pulling, and it mapped it out. And for some of the areas, Dr. Penfield was correct when they were talking about like the parts of the brain that were controlling the toes and the hands, but certain areas it didn't match up with. And so that's why the University of Washington created a new kind of map, because they were just saying that, you know, his work was brilliant, but it left a blind spot, because what the University of Washington noticed was that certain areas that weren't in control of direct movements were still involved. So areas that were controlling thinking, which is not a physical thing, were stimulated when they were moving certain parts of the body. And so they were noticing that it wasn't so black and white. The brain wasn't specifically, the motor areas weren't the only parts of the brain that were involved with controlling bodily movements. And it makes sense because the brain is supposed to be a tool that helps you navigate your environment without killing yourself by accident, and without without harming yourself. The brain is supposed to take in all of this sensory information and utilize it, and then help you come up with a plan of what you can do so you can achieve your goals and avoid getting eaten by a lion in the bush, or avoid walking off a cliff thinking that there's ground there. Like it makes sense that some of it would appear black and white, but that not all of it would. So I like that they made like a new map, but they weren't thinking that it's definitive. They're not saying that this is it. And so I do appreciate that about many scientists who make these theories, but they say exactly what you said. This isn't a fact. This is just one idea, one guess as to how it operates, how it works, where it comes from. I love the theories that say that consciousness arises out of the brain. And that's the biological, neurological theories. But I love the quantum theories that say that consciousness is not just something that happens because of the way that our brain is structured, but that it is a part of this, that certain pieces of the brain can do quantum computation, and 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 it's part of a larger system. And so I like that because it implies that the mind, or that consciousness, isn't just something that's within the brain. And so I love that exploring the mind body connection is us exploring like the relationship that reality has with itself, and how that isn't just physical, how it isn't just in the brain, how it isn't just individual, how it is shared. And so it definitely gave me a lot to chew on. And I definitely felt like I was running in circles a few times doing research, because I was like, wait, okay, I need to research this. And then wait, what's that? And I need an explanation for this explanation, because this feels like it's contradicting some of the assumptions that I made about my mind body connection, even though like I have firsthand experience. Like I have certainly tried to snap myself out of feeling like I'm in a funk, and I will put on music and I will dance, and that dancing will, usually inspire feelings of like excitement, and that excitement feels better, and then maybe that upset stomach goes away, or maybe that headache goes away, or maybe I just feel like I'm more physically energized after dancing, and so instead of doing a physical activity and having less energy, I seem to have more energy, and maybe that's because there's more mental energy. But it just feels like consciousness has been described as like the mind. And so some of the research that I saw kind of implies that consciousness is the mind, or that the mind is consciousness. But I don't think that that's entirely true. When, consciousness, the state of being aware and being aware of one's own environment, isn't just something that humans can do. And it isn't just something that mammals do. Trees and plants are aware. And so it seems like consciousness is maybe more likely this quantum huge um, network, and we're tapped into it, more so than us being the creators of consciousness, because our brain is structured to be conscious. I don't know if
Yeah, that definitely resonates. And that's kind of getting to this really exciting study that I found. It was like proposing a quantum theory of consciousness, and that's from the Journal of Applied Mathematics and Physics. Let me pull up. Wait, who is the? I'm going to pull up who those researchers were, just because they definitely deserve a shout out. Okay, so yeah, it's Xi and Zhu. They're Chinese names, but I really apologize if my pronunciation of them was horrible. But this is an article from September 2023, so very recent. That's another important thing. While you're digging into your research, it's usually best practice to look at the most recent articles, because that's going to give you the most up to date, like point of the research, right? Because it's always this constantly evolving thing. And if you're looking at old articles, more than likely the theories have changed, right? And maybe new studies have come out that have changed the way that the field as a whole is looking at certain problems. Um, but yeah, they propose that consciousness is a quantum phenomenon and it doesn't rely on Newtonian physics. And there's a lot of evidence to support this. I mean, it helps look at the hard problem, because uh, it helps explain certain things like the fact that certain communications between like the brain and certain aspects of the body happens too quickly for like standard neuron firing. Like it's going faster than it should be able to. Um, and that is because they're proposing that consciousness is a thing because of quantum mechanics, and it supports the panpsychist view, which is the idea that everything is conscious, not just, human beings or like any isolated thing. It's that the whole of the universe is conscious. So, including electrons, atoms, molecules, cells, organs, trees, rivers, mountains, Earth, sun, moon, stars, galaxies, and the universe as a whole. Right? Because they all contain information. They can receive and process information and change as a result. Um, so, I really like this view because it really emphasizes the unity of all of this, right? Like when you're looking at these problems and things like consciousness from a very divisive mentality of, this is one thing, this is another, and they act independently of each other, um, then it doesn't make sense why these things would be possible. But like when you look at things like quantum entanglement, which if you look into the research on quantum physics, quantum entanglement basically means that like two particles, um, once they become entangled, they respond to each other instantaneously, um, no matter how far away in the universe they are. Like they can communicate faster than the speed of light, and that shouldn't, under Newtonian physics, be possible. It doesn't really make sense, and it suggests that there's this other thing going on, this highly complex network of like communication and interconnection between everything in the universe, and it's not dependent on time or space. It's
Was did they talk about an example with a bird? How birds are connected to like the magnetic field around the earth, and how the way that they, when they're flying, like the way that they can perceive changes in the magnetic field is too fast for them to be completely separate, because they said that a bird can like interpret or be sensitive to changes miles away, but yet it's not like out there with binoculars and a little scanograph like in the sky. Like it just feels like it was like it like the evidence was suggesting that the bird is like one, or like deeply connected with that magnetic field, but they were like, it almost feels like they are responding like they're in the same, like they were saying that the bird was responding as like if it was like if that change happened right in front of it, but it couldn't see the change. And so they were like, how is it responding to something like it's happening right in front of it, but it's so far away? It can't just be that it's connected. Maybe it's, more than that. But I don't know if it brought up birds as the example for that.
it didn't, but that's a wonderful example of how we see things in nature, um, communicating and almost knowing things, receiving information, but not in the traditional way that we expect information to be received, right? Like we think it all happens mentally, with mental objects and concepts and, communication. But when you look at that a little bit deeper, even communication is just vibration. And if everything in this universe is just like everything vibrating and communicating and resonating in different ways, like there's really no difference between that and more subtle vibrations that we still pick up on without maybe necessarily being conscious of it. And so for me, like this brings in things like intuition, where like you like there have been so many times in my life where like I've thought about somebody and they call me right then, or like weird things like that, just things that I'm like, that is a crazy fucking coincidence. And to me, it it maybe like validates those experiences, because even though I can't say for sure that, you know, I predicted that that person was thinking about me, or that I could like somehow feel that and know it, and that they were communicating with me somehow outside of time and space or words or any sort of traditional way that we think about communication or receiving information. um like there is something mysterious maybe going on, and we are connected to that. Our consciousness is part of that. And I love how science and spirituality are getting closer and closer together, because
Mm-hmm.
like I would say maybe 50 years ago, panpsychism, which is the belief that like everything is conscious, was very like on the fringe. People didn't really see that as being the case. It seemed a little bit like esoteric, like woo woo, very like spiritual, right? But that's where we're at in quantum physics and mathematics. They're getting at problems of philosophy and consciousness and spirituality, which I think is such an interesting point in research to be, um, especially for me, because this is where my interest lies, right? In like what's what is going on beyond our current capacity to understand. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that quantum mechanics being brought into the problem of consciousness is a really
Mm-hmm.
really interesting development. Um, so yeah, but there's also a lot of research with the mind body connection, with more like day to day examples, and things that are still kind of considered like um, less valid forms of healing, and
Oh yeah,
like as
like
opposed to like traditional methods of medicine, right? Like pharmaceutical industries, you know, like talk therapy, things like that. Like other methods that are a little bit more holistic are being, you know, recognized for the value that they have. So things um, like yoga, meditation, um, like just more mindfulness and slowing down, that is all being recognized as a comparable treatment for chronic conditions, like I don't know, IBS or autoimmune conditions, even cancer. um, so they're
yeah.
demonstrating that our mind is a lot more powerful, and has a lot more of a profound impact on our health than we have previously recognized. So maybe we can get into that stuff a little bit. I did some research with biofeedback, which I think is really cool. Um, but yeah, I've been talking for a minute, so I want to pass the. I want
No,
to.
no, I love it. No, 'cause there's absolutely like just to go off your previous points, like when you're thinking of somebody and then they call you, or when you are sitting on a bus and you feel someone looking at you and you look back and they're looking at you. You had no other indication that someone was looking at you, but you could literally feel someone's eyes on you. That doesn't sound physical to me, you know, like even though we're talking about you felt, which implies touch, you know, but you still felt that, you know. there was an article that I read years ago that was talking about they were testing people's ability to feel others, and they had two participants separated by like thick, like 1 foot cement walls between them, and they were testing, but I think they had them. There was like depth perception. Like there was nothing else in the no one else in the room with them. There was no other furniture. There was only one light in each room, and they were able to like ask one person like where do you think the light is for the other person, because I think one person was blindfolded and one person could sit in the room and see the light, and the person that was blindfolded, they were asking them, like where's the light, is the light from the left or the right, and so they would move the light in the room with the person who wasn't blindfolded, and they got it right like more than half the time, and I was like, that is nuts that they're separated by cement walls and they could still pretty much like tune into the other person, because that was the goal. They're like, where do you think the light is for that other person? Where do you think it's facing them on their left or facing them on their right? The light is going to move. So where do you think it is now? And they tested the eyes on you kind of as well, where, someone was looking, there was one participant seated at the front of the room and then one person that was sometimes behind them. And so they're like, do you think anybody's looking at you now? And so they would ask them that question, and the results were pretty astounding. And the same thing with like the placebo effect, with the way that you can have two groups of people, you can tell them that they're taking the same medication, and then the people that are not actually taking the medication but still believe they are have about the same success rates. There was there was a study that I read about with some Harvard psychologists, and they were testing the perception of time and how that impacted healing. And so there were three groups. One group perceived time passing normally, one group perceived time passing twice as fast, and one group perceived time passing half as slow as normal time. And the group that and they all were impacted in basically confirming the same thing, which was that the people who perceived time going by faster healed slower. The people who thought that more time had passed healed faster. So because they thought that more time had passed, since they had they were cut the study, and I'm sure it was like a small little paper cut or something small like that, but they all got the paper cut at the beginning of the study, and depending on how they thought how much time had passed since that injury had occurred influenced the healing. And so it was like, the way that we think and perceive things absolutely impacts the experience. But it's it's wondering, another thing to wonder is whether or not we are conscious observers or conscious participants, because sometimes it feels like I am so actively involved, and sometimes I am watching intelligence in motion and I'm not controlling it or pushing it or directing it in any particular way. And so I bounce between like what I do is influencing and what I do is not really me doing it. Like as much as it feels like it's me, it doesn't always feel like it's me. And so is that consciousness that giant quantum network that's moving, and we're just experiencing it, because it doesn't feel like so many times I read like the brain creates the experience of consciousness, and I'm like, I don't know if it really does. So definitely the biofeedback, I'm all for it, because I think I might have given an example for that biofeedback.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the placebo effect. I was reading this article from the Journal of Clinical Medicine. It's a study from Rosatini et al. From 2023. And they were talking about the biology of the placebo effect. And there was also this, the nocebo effect, which I had never heard of. But basically, the placebo effect is the positive effects due to the belief that a treatment is going to help, right? So, like, and then the nocebo effect is the opposite. So, if you believe that something is going to make it worse, that also will happen as well. Like the pain will be exacerbated. They were specifically looking at pain in this article, but I thought it was something was interesting, right? That if so the placebo effect works in like two different ways. So either you're told like this is going to help you, or like in the context of a clinical study, you'll be given a real drug like the first couple times, right? And you're not necessarily told that it's going to help you or not, but it does because it's a medicine, whatever. But then also when they replace that drug with a placebo and you're still expecting it to work, you still have the same effects that the drug had. So, yeah, but for the nocebo effect, it was just if you're told that it's going to have a negative effect, it just will. It just like always will. It's almost like more effective than the placebo effect, which is interesting considering that I feel like there is such a dominant negative mentality within like the healthcare system right now. Like I feel like when people are given a diagnosis, um, it's very like they're not encouraged to be super hopeful, even though the science is telling them that, you know, um, their mentality has a huge pervasive impact on their treatment results. So this study was really trying to emphasize that the way that treatments are talked about by clinicians has almost as much of an impact as the actual physical treatments themselves. So that just really goes to show the power of our minds. Like there is a lot more going on here than just the physical. And so I'm glad that in general, clinicians and psychologists are looking more at those things and treatments that aren't so easy to control or observe. Things like mindfulness, which can't really be measured, but when they've put interventions like mindfulness into practice with patients, like the results speak for themselves. Um, just everything is able to slow down a little bit more, and kind of now going into the biofeedback thing. Um, Biofeedback basically is when you're measuring something. It could be heart rate. The study that I was looking at was looking at heart rate. So like you are hooked up to a heart rate monitor, and um, through the process of being able to see the heart rate as it's coming in, you're able to influence it more rather than just like thinking I'm going to slow my heart rate. Like having the direct feedback is actually really helpful in being able to slow that. So this study from Schumann et al. In 2022, this is from the Frontiers in Psychology. They were looking at uh, they looked at rumination and how that influenced the parasympathetic nervous system, and yeah, I guess some background.
Yeah.
So the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic is our rest and digest system, and the sympathetic is our fight or flight. But these are part of our autonomic nervous system, which controls our autonomic bodily functions like our heart rate, digestion, um, like body temperature, like all of these things that we are technically controlling, but like we don't consciously control. Um, so they were looking at when they induced rumination. So basically, they prompted their participants to start thinking about something that was stressing them out in their life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus when they were resting and they measured the activation and rumination. So thinking certain things increased activation of the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that I think is very counterintuitive, or no, not counterintuitive, obvious, because we know from our own experiences, right, that when we're ruminating, we get anxious and we start to freak out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a clear-cut example of how our mind influences our body. And we all know the long-term effects of chronic stress and sympathetic activation. It leads to chronic illness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the study with the biofeedback, they used participants that were struggling with depression, and basically they were trained with this HRV device that was on their smartphone. So they could do it at home, which I think is really cool and accessible. And they were trained to like watch the biofeedback of their heart rate and slow their breathing and um, basically slow down their heart rate intentionally. And I think this is really interesting because with biofeedback, it's not really clear how you're doing it. Like, it's really not clear how you're slowing your heart rate just by paying attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, we have that power to consciously influence our biological states without necessarily knowing how.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, they found that when participants did this biofeedback process for multiple weeks, it lessened their depressive symptoms overall and decreased the instances of rumination. So it had lasting effects on their interoception, which is your ability to like be aware of what's going on inside your body. So it increased their mind body connection basically in a way that was beneficial to their health.
Right.
Um, Whereas if you have low rates of interoception, which is you're not very aware of your heart rate, your breathing, how your body is doing, and how that's connected to what you're going through mentally,
Mm-hmm.
that produces a lot more chronic disease and things like depression, um, chronic stress, cancer, and all of the plethora of things that happen when we become off balance.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was really cool. That's just like a more concrete example of just the power of mindfulness and directing your attention back into what's going on in your direct experience. And yeah, I loved how that showed that was so critical to our overall health.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's just how paying attention helps. Like it just seems, I only laugh because it just seems so incredibly simple, that I don't always have to know exactly what I'm going to do, and I don't always have to know exactly why I did something before, but just paying attention to the way that I am in a moment, paying attention to my body's breath, my heartbeat, because all of that is a communication, right? That is the body communicating to the mind, where we physically are, because that is a reflection of where we sometimes mentally are. And being able to see that in real time, where they could see their heart rate, and they could, take those breaths, because that's how they train certain exercises that are taught to Navy SEALs. Is you're in a highly stressful situation, and how can you not panic in what you willingly are walking into, a high stress, high risk environment. How do you stay calm and complete the mission? And it was, paying attention to your breath, using your breath to calm your mind. And plenty of people who practice meditation and yoga say this, that, if when I calm my body, my mind follows. Calming the body absolutely has a great influence on how the mind is feeling. And then the other thing that contributes is the gut brain axis, the mind body, or another example of that mind body connection, how the trillions of bacteria and viruses and fungi that all live in your digestive tract, they send hormones, and hormones are like bodily instructions, and they send hormones and messages directly to the brain, and then that impacts your mood and your mental health. There are certain theories that say that you can eat your way out of depression, because having a certain variety or having certain types of bacteria and viruses and fungi in your microbiome in your gut will influence the way that your brain feels. There was an article that I read, and it was suggesting, or what the results implied, that they were testing Korean women, I think between ages 25 and 49, and I'll pull up um, that that resource now. Um, but as I'm looking for that, they were testing a healthy Korean women, and they had noticed that the women who suppressed individuals who frequently suppress their emotions have a less diverse microbial community in their gut, which is typically associated with poor overall health. And this was a recent study published in Psychological Medicine. Let me see if I can get more specific than that. Um, but I thought that that was really interesting. Oh, okay. It was Cambridge University did this study, and this was in March of 2023 with co-authors. Co-authors, my ladies. And this was study. In a joint statement, study co-authors Shan Lim Ki, a postdoctoral research fellow at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and Yang Yu Liu, again, apologize for the pronunciation because we will get better at that, an associate professor at Brigham and Women's, um, were the ones who were the author of that particular study with Cambridge University. So it was, and Brigham and Women, which is also included as a contributing. But it was just interesting that when they suppressed their emotions, they impacted the diversity of the bacteria and the viruses and the fungi that was living in their gut. And with a less diverse bacterial viral community in their gut, they had poorer health. And that was both mental and physical. So just not being honest about the way that we feel, not paying attention to the way that we feel impacts us. So it's not just in breathing and watching your heart rate. It's also being honest when you feel like when you feel low, or when you, and not judging yourself because you feel that way, but just being space to feel that way and how that impacts your physical and your mental health. And so I thought that that was interesting, that just the suppressed emotions contributed to poor health.
Yeah, that's so freaking interesting because why? I don't know, but I think it's because our conscious states aren't just conscious, but they're also biological, right? Like we don't necessarily think that the thoughts that we're thinking will impact our health because they're just thoughts, right? They exist somewhere in the ether of our mind, which isn't like our mind and our body are inherently interconnected, but the experience of our mind and the experience of our body sometimes feel very different, right? Like, um, what's going in our mind, like, we don't really know what's going on specifically within our body. And so we kind of just can make the assumption that it doesn't ripple down. But I think that's an amazing example of, yeah, like you wouldn't think it would have an impact, but it does. And maybe it's not predictive in the sense that, like, you can say, oh, with each negative thought or with each emotion that you repress, this amount of your microbiome dies. Like, you can't measure that closely with these things. So I think that's what makes these problems more difficult to study. But there's clearly something going on. And
Something smells fishy. No,
yeah, like our consciousness is more powerful than we really give ourselves credit for. And what's funny was when you were talking, Jay commented the mind body connection goes beyond the physical boundaries of the body into the collective, creating ripples. And when I read that, I got crazy deja vu. I was like, I've read that before. I remember being in this, like, I have like a vague fuzzy, not a memory, but it's like I've
Mm-hmm.
read that before. I've been here before. I've been like, and that is another example of these mysterious things that happen where it's like, there's no way I could have read that before because this moment has never existed before, at least in terms of how I think about time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but like in a sense, that does demonstrate that we're tapped into this larger thing going, and there's all these like mysterious feelings or sensations or experiences that we go through because our consciousness is still very unclear. And I'm almost thinking about the mind body connection as sort of the mind, the individual mind being like the larger body is everything else, right? Like this is my mind,
Yeah. And so
and
we're
I
like a
think it's
cell in the
Jackie's mind.
galactic body.
Galactic body.
I don't know. I was just trying. We're trying to put words to things that can't be described. It's not always going to hit.
Yeah, sometimes I'm just throwing words at the wall and I don't even know if I'm making sense. So that's for sure. But um, yeah, it's almost like it's not clear exactly what the mind is or what the body is.
Mm-mm.
Um, but there is like this constant interplay going on, um, which is really freaking fun to dig into. And you could read for hours and hours on these
Oh my goodness. Yes.
topics. And there's, little, like each study might be changing something slightly different or doing things a little bit differently because um, the way that you arrive at new information in science is just by making little tweaks, or replicating a study and seeing if you get the same effects in like a different population or like in different places in the world. Um, so yeah, you can read all of this stuff forever, but like I think specifically with this question, a lot of our exploration can be done like within our direct experience,
Mhm.
and all of these articles that we are reading should not maybe not be taken with a grain of salt, but I think it's important to not just see it as like, yeah, this is the science, but also thinking about whether that makes sense to you in terms of how you experience your consciousness, because the mind body connection is so highly individual, and it's like you can conduct your own science by introducing things into your own life. Some things, like mindfulness, meditation, different breathing exercises, even biofeedback, like
Mhm.
it allows you to better understand the nuance and the connection between your specific consciousness, and whether we can say that's separate or not, we can't, and your body, because I feel like it really does differ from person to person. um, and the real fun part about this is applying it to your own life, not just playing these like intellectual mind games thinking about something.
Mhm.
um, like it's cool to tie them in to your own life and tie it to experiences like deja vu or intuition or things like that. It just provides more context for questioning, and that's why I love research so much, because it doesn't, like, it scratches my itch for knowledge and my curiosity, but it doesn't quench it. And so it's like I'm still craving more information. It's like it's my love for learning and like my passion for existence um is flamed by the experience of researching something. And whereas previously in my life I've wanted answers, Now it's just I want to explore. That's really all
Hmm.
that I see research being for, is like exploring for the sake, because it's interesting as fuck.
Hmm.
And it's not about getting the answer, because I don't need the answer to feel like I'm valuable, or that like I have benefited from the process of researching.
Hmm.
Um, but it's cool because it provides more depth to your experience. Like, rather than just going about your day not being aware of what of your own consciousness and like how mysterious and crazy and powerful it is, like I can go about my day being like, well, if I focus on something specific, how does that change my reality? And my yoga practice has really demonstrated this for me. Because, yeah, it's not in any sort of way that is controllable, but just by bringing your attention into yourself and your direct experience, what's going on in your body and your mind, like things begin to shift and come more into balance. It's like the attention is the bridge between the mind and body that helps it to communicate more. And I think that's so interesting because attention is also a big part of the science with quantum physics right now. So obviously, like you said before, like you don't know if we're just here observing or if we're influencing, um, the reality around us. But I do think it's both. Like we have more of an influence than we necessarily realize, and like, and it doesn't have to make sense for it to be true.
No, no, it definitely doesn't. It just because it does, it feels like sometimes you are so active and it feels like you are directly influencing your experience, and sometimes things feel very serendipitous, like you happen to want to go to the grocery store at the same time as a friend, and you bump into that friend and they're having a rough time and you're there for them. Normally, let's say you go to the grocery store on a Monday, happens to be a Wednesday, and it's out of your normal pattern, but for some reason you felt like, I'm just going to go today. I could wait till next Monday, but I'm going to go today. It's Wednesday. It's not my normal day. I'm going to go. And you bump into that friend and you're there for them. And then you're on the drive home and you're like, man, I am so glad. I had no idea that that would happen, but I'm so glad that I was there for that. So it feels like, I wasn't directly influencing in that example. Like I wasn't directing my attention to support a friend, but somehow in taking care of myself, I happened to be at the right place at the right time to be there for somebody in a way that I would have wanted to had I known that they were going through something, right? But we don't always know. So it feels like there is intelligence at motion. It doesn't always feel like I am directing exactly where I will be of influence, but I do agree that it is both, and that we do have a lot more influence than we realize, because many instances I have wanted to be powerless. I have wanted to be at the mercy of the universe and everything happening around me because I didn't want to take responsibility for the influence that I do have. And so I have definitely felt that, and paying attention is a great tool. It's a great experience to be attentive to your experience, because you are that experience. So I've definitely been paying attention to how, you know the things that I eat can impact my mood. And so, we've heard that countless times before, like drink more water, eat more whole foods, eat the rainbow, have a good diversity. And it's like, of course, you want a good diversity because you want internally for there to be great diversity in your microbiome. When you eat the same things, you tend to get the same nutrients, or you tend to get the same calories and carbs and things like that. And so if you eat the same thing, then your body's not going to have all of the of possible tools that it could have to function and do its own thing. When we were as we're chatting about this, I was thinking about how people in similar environments on similar diets tend to have similar feelings, similar processes, and similar issues. So it's not just that we are this individual who's having this experience, and we influence it by paying attention to it. It's also all the ways that we don't realize that we're contributing to that experience. So I live in the US, and this is a very high, ultra processed foods everywhere I go. A lot of the water that's tap water has fluoride in it, which impacts your pineal gland in your brain, which may impact consciousness to some degree. We didn't get into that too much research, but just because there's so many considerations. And how the ultra processed food leads to the same um, chronic illnesses, but also that a lot of us in the US have a lot of the same chronic stressors. And so we have very similar chronic illnesses because of the mental stress and because of the diets that we tend to share. And so it's like there are so many contributing factors, and it doesn't need to be stressful when we're thinking about making changes. It's starting small, you know, breathing more when you happen to notice I'm freaking out. I'm freaking out right now, guys. Like, okay, okay. So what I tend to tell myself is like, I'm okay. Like right now, I am okay. Our life is not in danger. Right now we have a home, or right now we're living out of our car, or right now we're living with a family friend, or right now, we're working, but like right now things are what they are. And so we can do something with that. And just telling myself that I'm okay helps. And breathing when I feel stressed out, and drinking more water, and eating less processed foods, and not I can't, we're not going to change our whole diet in a day, but just thinking like, okay, well, normally I would have a lot of bread with dinner. So bread is a lot of sugars and starches. Maybe we take out the bread and we have more vegetables and more meat. And instead of bread, we maybe have the starch coming from potatoes, right? And so there's like little things that you can do, because every little bit helps in the same way that every little bit contributes to the whole. So I was just thinking about the ways that I don't even notice how I influence my physical and mental experience, and how, at least when I do notice some way, I can take a look at that, and I can see whether or not that is adding, or whether that's adding something that maybe we need mentally or physically, or maybe that is more of a barrier. Um, and so it's definitely worth exploring, because you are I guess you are your best test subject. That's the way that I feel like I am the mouse and the scientist and the maze and the clipboard, and we're going to put Amanda through maze number 2,004,785,063. Like that's the maze number we're going through today. Drop her in and let's see what happens. So it's keeping it light, keeping it fun, because that's an analogy, that's an image that makes me laugh. Is imagining that I'm the mouse and the maze, and I'm the scientist dropping myself into it. Like, all right, let's find out. So that makes me laugh. But those are different things. That's a different way that I can kind of put this in a way that my brain can like interpret that. Although we are the mouse, we are also the scientist in my own imagination. And so it's not that we are in total control and totally helpless, but that there is a beautiful dance in between where we have influence and attention and opportunity.
Beautifully said. Yeah. And I just real quick wanted to address one of the questions that we had in the chat, because I think it cuts down to the root of this. Like, is the body in the mind, or is the mind in the body? And my best answer is there's no difference. They're inherently interconnected. They are the same thing. And I've kind of been seeing all of this experience, both inwardly and outwardly, as being within my mind. And when you do that, you take responsibility for both what's going on mentally, but also what you're doing physically, right? Physically, which, are we even sure that there's a physical reality? No. We perceive it as physical, but everything's moving. There's waves, it's not as solid as we like to think it is, or how we have traditionally been led to believe. So, yeah, I think a good note to end on is just taking responsibility for all aspects of your being, right? Knowing that what you give your body in terms of food, water, rest, exercise influences your mental well being, but also the thoughts that you are feeding and repeating in your mind, and um, your judgments and your attachments, and how that creates stress. That negatively impacts your body. Um, so both are important to consider, and you don't need to know exactly how that's happening to feel it out within yourself and conduct those experiences. Drop yourself in a little maze and maybe try drinking a little bit more water, or try focusing on your breath for 10 minutes a day or something like that, right? Like just little things, little shifts. And that's what we're constantly doing as we oscillate, between different experiences, different polarities of what this human experience can give us, right? And the way to come back into balance is by paying attention to what's going on within and without, and responding. So, yeah, this will wrap up our first research episode. This was a lot of fun digging into. Uh, we should have said this maybe before, but feel free to suggest topics. I think for our episodes going forward, we'd love to get some topics from the community of things that you'd like us to research and come with our findings on. So, any burning questions you have, it can be related to DU or not. Like we're curious about everything and anything. I guess everything and anything is basically what we're talking about. So pretty much anything is related to the conversation we have here at DU. So
Oh,
anything
yeah.
that you want us to talk about, just let us know. And we hope you enjoyed. Thanks to everybody who's tuning in for our live in the chats or after the fact. We appreciate you. And we'll see you next week for another episode of Do You Real?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. And don't forget that we still have an opportunity, a last chance opportunity for you to save an additional $350 off of the Virginia Beach mini retreat, which is happening next week, February 1st through the 5th. You can use coupon code There Can Only Be One, or There Can Be Only One, all one word, and then combine it with your tier 3 Patreon code to save a total of $700. Amazing deal. Definitely recommend it if you can make that work. I wouldn't miss out on this opportunity. And we'll still be doing Patreon call this Sunday, tier 2 and tier 3. And then we'll send an updated message, I think, on Discord and on Patreon email about next week's calls and shows. But excited to see everybody in person next week, and I hope that you have a great weekend, everyone.